All right.
See, sorry.
Mhm. Well, thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to come. Um, again, like I said, we'll have an overview, just some typical discussion on some of the background, the history, timeline, why, what, touch briefly on some implications as far as insurance, development, future timeline, things like that. And we'll talk about these mapping results and any resources. We'll point to some resources. And then, of course, at the end, we would like to open for general discussion. If you have specific questions relating to your property, your structure, your home, your business, it's probably good to reach out directly to your floodplain administrator or the person that's acting in that role, because some of the questions get very specific and they're best answered on a one-on-one basis. So I'll just leave that as a caveat. The National Flood Insurance Program is the program that administers flooding nationally. And flooding is the most costly and devastating occurrence nationally that we see. And so our government and many people associated with that have decided that in order to help recover, protect, mitigate from the risk that are associated with flooding, that there is a national program whereby these can be depicted, these flood hazards can be depicted, and that community members can obtain flood insurance. As part of the program, it is important to update flood hazard studies periodically, because it is most important that we strive to protect health, life, and safety. And so that is one of the reasons why this flood study was undertaken. The National Flood Insurance Program is something that communities participate in. In order to participate in that national program, there are minimal level of requirements such as building requirements, insurance requirements, regulations that they must be kept, and other regulations that they adopt. Communities are required to inform the public of this risk and to also keep land use code requirements up to date as they change. And those are part of the things that communities have to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. But the program is something that has other inputs too. First off, it allows homeowners, business owners to purchase insurance based on standardized zones, and then to be eligible for federal assistance immediately after devastating floods or declared disasters too. It is a program that is overseen federally by FEMA and their partners, but is managed by communities, and they're the ones who make sure that, again, regulations and building requirements and other ordinances are kept up to date and maintained, but is enforced by lenders who offer loan amounts on mortgages, are required to look at these flood maps and to determine if flood insurance is required on the property for the life of the loan. Engineers and other subject matter experts are part of the program that take data and do statistical analysis. By doing that and computing these zones, it allows for discounts in certain areas and areas of high hazard or moderate hazard or low hazard, so that people interested in purchasing flood insurance can buy them at discount rates. There's a general partnership that goes into the flood study and making sure that all parties are at the table, so to speak. You know, as I mentioned before, communities are the ones that administer the National Flood Insurance Program. They can communicate the risk to not only their constituents, but if they know that there are added risks that are not currently up to date, they can communicate that to the state, to FEMA, and see that those areas are updated. Communities are involved again in enforcement of regulations and public communication. And this public meeting that's being held is an integral aspect of the typical type of communication that happens around these studies. The state, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, is a major partner. They respond to communities to incorporate any changes or risks that need to be updated. They can initiate risk updates if there are needs that they're aware of. And they play a vital role as an assistant to not only FEMA and communities in training and communication and any needs. FEMA, again, is the federal partner that provides a large amount of the funding and knowledge and resources to update these flood studies. And not only that, but also mitigation grants and a whole suite of other things, and some we'll get into. There are some private stakeholders that are also involved. They can be private companies, private firms, they can be watershed coalitions, other interested parties that have a vested interest in making sure that flood risk is properly up to date and adequately communicated. This study had started back quite a few years and incorporates a couple of areas, not just La Plata County, although that is what we're discussing here. There's some of the neighboring counties too were also part of this study. You can see on this screen some of these reaches, these stream reaches, they're in blue. There were quite a few that were identified as ones to restudy or study new if they hadn't been studied. There are other areas that have flood hazard risk depicted on maps. Those have not changed as of yet. Just these ones here in blue are the ones that were being updated for La Plata County. So you can see there's a few that go through the major population centers, Durango, Bayfield, Ignacio, and down to the county and state boundary. We get questions on what goes into these studies. First and foremost, we need terrain data, which is a description of the land surface, the high points, the low points, and it's very detailed and very extensive. LIDAR, or very accurate laser mapping, is used to obtain terrain data on a large scale, and some of that was used in these studies. Survey crews then are sent out into the field to capture more information, things that do not get picked up from the aerial topography, such things as bridges, the bridge openings, the sizes, culverts, also below water channel, the FOWEG or bathymetry, sometimes that's what that's called. Anything that's below water, surveyors go and pick that up, and it helps to describe the complete channel and floodplains for these streams. Then statistical analysis on the amount of rainfall or peak stream runoff, which is called hydrology, is then computed, and it determines the peak flow for rare storm events, for a couple of different events, and those are input and used. Again, all of this is data that, due to its federally funded and state funded, is available for download and inspection. Then that information is taken and put into what's termed as hydraulic models. These models are ones which compute water surface elevation, depths, velocities, determine where floods can go and how high they can get. Those are then mapped as floodplains for ease of use, so that anyone can quickly look and pan around and see on a map where those floodplains are depicted. These data together were generated some draft maps or preliminary maps. That term's an important term. They are now preliminary, meaning they're at a state that they've been reviewed by multiple partners, including FEMA and their partners, but they're now in a preliminary state for public to look at and see what the updates are. These have been provided to communities, all this data, including these maps. But going forward, there's a couple of steps that have to happen before this draft data becomes effective or final. As this timeline states, the preliminary issuance was in February of this year. Then some meetings were held with community officers and with FEMA and their representatives back in March. And then after a couple of meetings and notifications, there will begin what is called an appeal period, a 90-day appeal period. It's required for all studies, and it will start pretty soon, late spring, early summer. We're already in the summer, I guess. And there will be a publication in the Federal Register, which is a government official publication, and there will be 2 notifications and 2 weeks apart in local newspapers, and they'll be in the legal portions of those. And once those publications occur, that is when the clock starts for the 90-day appeal period, when any appeals or comments can be received and incorporated. They go to, are gathered and go to FEMA, who then will resolve or incorporate as needed. And then after that, there will be a letter that is issued to the communities letting them know that the appeal period is ended and setting the date for when these flood maps become effective. Now, depending on the appeals that come in and any data that comes in, it can fluctuate. But right now it's projected to be sometime towards the end of 2021, which means the maps will become effective sometime in early 2022. And as these dates get closer and we hit these milestones, those end dates will become more clear and communicated to all in the community. Now, what are some of the results? We often get a question, what do these results mean? There's a polygon and a couple of different shading on the maps. Is this where it will flood? And only where it will flood? Well, that's a good question. They are taken into account the best available data at the time that they were given, at the time the topography was flown and at the time the survey was flown, and including rainfall data, stream data, hydraulic data at the time that we had them. There are certain things that are not mapped because they are not a part of this standard flood hazard. Say, if a dam were to burst and break, that would be above and beyond the analysis that was performed here. In major storm events, the uncertainties with debris or clogging, or sometimes there are logs from the mountainous streams that, due to just the natural stance, or if there have been large burn scars or things like that, large storms can carry those down and they can clog up bridges and culverts and create uncertainty as to where the floodplains can go. Those are not accounted for because the amount of uncertainty is too great, but know that there is flood hazard and additional hazard that may not be depicted in these. Again, I mentioned that these are the best available data at the time. So they are up to date. Some of the studies on some of these maps hadn't been studied for a long time, so there will be some changes depicted. What you'll typically see is a map with some different shading. Sometimes they have aerial photography underneath, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can view them on online viewers where you can pan around and you can change what's shown beneath. But some of the things that you'll see, I'll highlight here. The teal areas are Zone A, or sometimes Zone A or AO or AH. That is the high hazard area, or the 1% annual chance flood. That's an important distinction because that is in those areas are where flood insurance is required. In times past, you may have heard of the term 100-year flood. And that is truly a misnomer, because sometimes people got it in their mind that, oh, we had the 100-year flood, I heard it in the news, so we're good for the next 99. Mother Nature doesn't work that way. She can flood when and where she wants. The term we use is a 1% annual chance, meaning there is a 1% chance that this storm could happen in any given year. It is a small percent, but it is a substantial percent. In the beige area or orangish area is the 0.2% chance, even more rare. In past, this was the flood that was called the 500-year flood. It is the area of moderate hazard risk. And outside of that, in the white or sometimes unshaded areas, that is the low hazard risk. These maps, they can be in PDF form, they can be in online form, they're available at many different locations. The current effective ones are available at FEMA, the Map Service Center, or their National Flood Hazard Layer. The preliminary ones are available at the community and also at a website, coloradohazardmapping.com, and I'll show that in a later slide. In addition to the flood plains, in the center of the flood plain, there will sometimes be depicted what's called the floodway. The floodway is an area that usually depicts higher hazard, higher depth of flooding, of higher velocities, but it's a special area. You've got the fringes on the outside, and on the inside is the floodway. The floodway, as I like to describe it, is an area of regulatory importance if in Colorado a developer was to encroach and build up and encroach in on the flood plain on both sides. At what point could they encroach on both sides all along that river corridor to not increase the water surface elevation more than half a foot anywhere? That's the standard in Colorado. Some other states have higher or lower standards, but in Colorado, it's a half a foot. And then that is depicted as where the floodway is. If any future development were to incur in or near the floodway, a higher regulatory standard to prove that no adverse impacts to your neighbor, either upstream or downstream. If you were to build or develop in that area, you would have to show that there would be no adverse impacts. So you'll hear it sometimes called as don't impact your neighbor. So that's what a floodway is. Now, when we look at the updates to the current preliminary study versus what is effective right now, we took a national data set of structures of buildings. It's not the most accurate, but it has quite a bit in there. Some counties or communities have more up-to-date building structures in their spatial sets, their GIS databases, their online databases. But we did a quick count of areas that were currently in the effective special flood hazard area, or that 1% annual chance flooding, and those that are now newly in the preliminary, and those that are removed or would be removed from the preliminary and that are currently added. So you can see in the unincorporated areas, we have a total of about 940 that were in the effective special flood hazard area. Only 411 in the preliminary, which means about 705 were removed and about 177 were added. And this is usually an impact to, or a result of, just the newer hydrology and newer hydraulics, newer topography. There are lots of changes from some of these old studies. So there are people that may see their homes removed. There are people who may see homes or property or structures added to it. So these results, as they get depicted, they are a line on a map. And that's just for convenience sake to show where these floodplains are to the best of our data. But Mother Nature does not operate as a line on a map. She can, areas can flood outside of a map. There can be debris areas. There can be, a whole suite of uncertainty in the way that floods operate. So just because there is a line and a property is outside of that line, that doesn't mean that there is no risk. There might be less or reduced risk, low levels or moderate levels, but and not the high levels, but know that a line on a map is just that, it's for convenience. We did use our best data at the time, and it did go through multiple rounds of reviews and comments through contractors, so it has incorporated the best use of any current and up-to-date engineering data and judgment and methodology. But there is a process to allow for changes if there is any new information, new construction, any new type of information that would change the results. There is a process to do that. But just know that we're always at risk of some risk. It may be very small, it may be moderate, it may be minute, but there always is some risk of flooding. And that's important because flooding is not covered by our typical homeowners insurance. And we'll turn the time over to FEMA. I don't know if it's you, Aaron, or Diana, who is going to take the next 3 slides.
So I'm going to take the slides. This is Diana.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about 2 options that we have today. And the window of opportunity is closing very fast on us. Casey talked about the flood insurance rate maps. They've been called flood insurance rate maps in the 50 some odd years since the program has initiated, but that's changing. Right now, you have until September 1st to take advantage of our, as Casey mentioned, discounted premiums. But after October 1st, we are doing a new risk rating methodology. In the past, we've only taken into consideration 2 types of flooding, riverine and coastal. But we know across this country that we have more, we have different types of flooding. We have heavy rains, we have tsunami risk, we have other types of causes of flooding that we have on there. Mack truck hits a fire hydrant, or you know, we have these cloud bursts that come down and drop a whole bunch of water, regardless of the flood zone. Where that water lands and rises is going to cause flooding to some people. So our new rating methodology is going to take into a more varied type of flooding. We're going to be including heavy rainfall. We're going to be including the tsunami. We're going to be including more levee depictions on there and what happens behind those levees. So we've not, as I said, we've not changed our rating methodology in over 50 years. Just like mapping, we have better technology today than we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, when we were just, you know, here's where it's going to flood and we don't know how deep. We call those flat maps. That's some of the original maps back in the 60s and 70s were that type. And we're getting better at depicting where where the water is going to go. Our rating methodology, though, from effective policies October 1 forward, are not going to be using flood zones as our rating structure. We're going to be looking at individual risks. So we're using a whole host of models from a variety of federal and private, federal agencies and private companies, NOAA, USGS, Army Corps of Engineers, CoreLogic, and some catastrophe models that we're combining into our rating methodology. So a number of the variables we're going to look at is the value of the property. And the reason we're looking at that is in our analysis, we found that lower valued homes, smaller homes are paying more than the homes that are in the $5, $6, $7 million range. So the lower valued homes were subsidizing the higher value homes. When you get a 1,500 square foot house, the damage is going to be less than a 6,000 square foot house. So we're trying to put equity in action when we come to how we rate structures. One of the ways we can do that is looking at the replacement cost. So more valued homes are going to pay a little bit more than the lower valued homes because that's more equitable for us. We're also going to be using what's the distance of the structure to the flooding source? How close to the creek or the lake is that structure going to be located? How far is that first floor elevation from the lowest adjacent grade? We're looking at 6 different types of foundations: post-pier piling, crawl space, basement, slab on grade, things like that. So we're also going to be looking at the types of flooding that are available. We have different types all over the country. Sometimes we have multiple types of flooding. Take, for instance, Hurricane Harvey, a couple of years ago. They had not only storm surge, coastal flooding, but they also had 30 some odd inches of rain that caused the riverine situation to overflow. So we're taking all of that information and rating a policy, not based on flood zone, but based on individual structures and their risk for flooding. You can get more information at the websites that are on here. It is important that you educate yourself on how we are changing. It is 180 degrees from what we've had in the past. Next slide. So these are some of the variables that we're going to be using on the left-hand side as we look at the screen. Those are what we've used in the past. The map zone, the base flood elevation, what was the difference between the lowest floor and that base flood elevation, the foundation type. Those are what we've used in the past. And as you see on the right-hand side, the variables just on rating variables, then we've got the different types of flood perils, the pluvial, which is heavy rain, the fluvial, which is riverine, the coastal areas. How are levees affected? What are the flood frequencies? We have multiple 100-year floods in areas every year. And then we add our fees and our surcharges on top of that. Next slide. So with map changes coming in, we have to look at, okay, what's the rating methodology best right now? The risk is there today. The maps have identified that risk, and you need to look at that risk and how it affects the property owners that are within those special flood hazard areas and outside of those special flood hazard areas. As I said, prior to policies being written September 1st, because we have a 30-day waiting period, the people can take advantage right now and get a preferred risk policy to cover that risk when they're outside of that high risk area, or if they're built to a higher standard, and take advantage of, and that will carry into affecting rates under our risk rating methodology that's coming later this year. At no time will we increase premiums annually more than 18% on an individual structure. For certain types of buildings, Congress has said, well, we want you to increase rates 25%. So those are severe repetitive loss, non-primary residences, commercial residences, structures that are that have been flooded and are substantially damaged or want to be substantially improved. Those carry actually a higher risk for flooding than anybody else. Our grandfather rule, if it was built to a certain standard, we would honor that standard until that structure is substantially damaged or substantially improved. That is going away. Now we're looking at that individual risk. What's the difference between the lowest adjacent grade and the first floor elevation? Preferred risks as of September 1st for application for new business is going away. They buy it today, have a policy in effect. They're on a glide path to full risk rating. As I said, replacement cost is going to be a huge piece of our rating that we come on there to offset some of the inequities that have been out there for 50 some odd years. We will still be able to transfer current policies when selling the property to the new owners. And as long as they keep that continuous coverage, it will be on a different glide path than the people who buy new on or after September 1st. They will go immediately into our new rating methodology. So it's important to convey to your citizens that, yeah, the risk is there based on the map. Mandatory purchase will still be based on flood insurance rate maps, as will floodplain management. We're just not going to be rating it based on that flood zone any longer. So these are some things that you need to keep aware of, to outreach to your communities, to make them, you know, hey, the risk is there right now with those people that are moving into special flood hazard areas. They need to protect the life and properties that they have built, and is a big financial investment that they have. Next slide.
Oh, I think that was the last one.
It is. So I don't know who's doing the development implications.
I'll just touch that just briefly.
Okay.
But thank you very much, Diana. If there are any questions about insurance, we can put them in the chat, and some of our specialists can point you to resources or set up a time to maybe answer some of your questions one-on-one, because insurance is a specific and an individual thing. You know, everybody's case is a little bit different. So some of those questions are best handled on a one-on-one basis. As Diana said, in addition to you know, those who already have homes or are in a floodplain or could be in a floodplain or out, there are now potential implications for communities and development. The community ordinance, they are the ones who determine what type of regulations are required. They follow the guidelines, of course, of the National Flood Insurance Program. But with these preliminary maps, they can adopt these as best available and regulate to the more restrictive, these preliminary draft ones versus the effective, or they can just regulate to the effective ones up until they become, these preliminary ones become effective. Note that there are implications, additional implications should development in a floodway versus in a non-floodway out in the fringe. If there are any questions, of course, about development, your floodplain administrator is a resource to reach out to for any specific questions. We often get asked, can these results be changed? As I alluded to, yes, during this appeal period, there is a window, of course, that any new information, and it must meet a stringent standard. Here, I'll read this, based on mathematical or measurement errors, natural change, physical conditions, or technically incorrect data or methodology. So that's something that would need to be submitted to show that an area or a stream or a portion is incorrect. They must be submitted and supported with the supporting technical data and submitted within that 90-day appeal period. And appeals, because that's the specific term, they are limited to areas with new or modified special flood hazard areas or the 1% annual chance. That's the teal areas and the floodway on the inside. If there are things that are requested for change that are not within that, say a label, a road, a political jurisdiction boundary, things like that, those usually are what we call comments. They can be incorporated too, but they are not a formal appeal. They must be submitted through the community, and the community then combines them together, submits to FEMA office, and the FEMA will review them, incorporate as appropriate. Here's just a typical outline of just the process I described. Make note that the email address here, and this, since it's being recorded, and also these slides usually get uploaded to our website and sent out to the communities. But you can see the R8 comments and appeals at fema.dhs.gov, and also terry.fade@state.co.us. Those are the email addresses to send in appeals. There's another method to also, which exists now and will exist in the future, to make changes. They're called a LOMAR or a LOMA, letter of map revision or letter of map amendment. A letter of map revision is, if you're familiar with those, they are areas that get changed through usually physical means or updated new information, scientific information, and it revises the map, and it's usually for a larger area, for more than just one structure. If there are any LOMARs in the works right now in your communities, it's best to make sure that they tie in both to the preliminary and effective data, so that once the data becomes effective, they now are not out of date and they tie in. If there's a LOMAR that's in process or being worked on that will be submitted shortly, where I'd like to tie into only the preliminary data, it must be approved by FEMA. But they will go, if it is approved in a case-by-case basis, it will not go effective until after these become effective, so early 2022. For an individual structure to be removed from a floodplain, say it's elevated and the lowest adjacent grade around that structure is high enough that it would be outside and above the base flood elevation of the floodplain, with a surveyor and filling out some documentation and sent in, it can be removed from the floodplain, that individual structure. There's a letter that gets sent, and that can be then sent to your insurance agent or lender to show that that structure is out. If there are any current properties that have a LOMA, they will be revalidated closer to when these become effective to show that, yes, these letters of map amendment still show this structure as being out with the new effective, and they will be revalidated. But you want to keep an eye to make sure that once they get these floodplains become effective, that that your lenders or insurance agents are still aware that these are effectives still. There are a bunch of other resources available to everyone. There's some contacts here on the last slide, but reach out to your local floodplain administrator. They're a great resource, and floodplain administrators can reach out also to the state and to FEMA as resources. There's the state study leads, FEMA and also at the state. There are our FEMA area representatives, Diana and Aaron, both on the phone. That are good resources to have. I recommend going to floodsmart.gov if you just want to learn about. There's some great videos. They're adding a lot of videos and informative things. It's constantly being updated, and especially with this new transition, and there's going to be a lot of stuff up there that Diana mentioned. There's a phone number, 800 number that anybody can call. The state has a website, CWCB, and I'll just take a quick moment to highlight let's make sure that I'm highlighting the right thing here. To highlight the website coloradohazardmapping.com. This is available for anybody to go and take a look. And there's a couple of different areas. You can click on the map if you just want to browse around and see areas where preliminary data has been incorporated. You can browse around if you're familiar with Google Maps or other community maps. It's very similar. You can pan around and take a look. So we could take a look near Bayfield. Right now, I've got the preliminary floodplains. You can see in yellow is the regulatory floodway. The blue is the zone AE. You've heard that term, or the 1% annual chance. In parentheses, you'll see there, it's also the 100-year. And in the orange, you can see the zone shaded zone X, or 0.2% annual chance, or 500-year floodplain. And so you can pan around and look there, change the background if you want to see your community. There's also, if you go here on flood hazard, you can type in a specific address, your address here, and it'll pull up your address and compare. There'll be a slide that'll compare what's effective on the left-hand side and what's preliminary on the right-hand side, and show some information about that property. If you want to go also to check out your community, there's more. Oops, I think I hit collect. Let me go back here and I'll go to La Plata County. And there's additional information. It's set up as a story map, so you can kind of read through how this study progressed as you scroll down. Oops. As you scroll down or click over on these, you can see different milestones that happened. See, actually, there's a project going on now, but the previous project, you can see some of the milestones that took place. You can click here and see some of the different meetings. There's usually slides or PDFs or documentation associated with that. You can click and see where survey was taken, where those flow rates were computed, the hydrology and hydraulics, or again, you can click around on the floodplain. I'll zoom in on an area to show something. Oops, excuse me for clicking multiple. So over here, I can turn on the preliminary and see what the preliminary floodplains are. And I can also turn on FEMA's national flood hazard layer, or what's called the effective. And sometimes you can turn both on. It gets a little busy, but you can see in areas where the light blue is out here, is now back a bit more. So there's areas that are reduced. So this is where it was, and this is where, or it's where it is currently, and this is where the preliminary shows. So there's definitely some reductions and some changes. So suggest going around and looking there. Some also interesting things that you can take a look at are the depth grids. You can hover over a location and see what the depth of flooding in the 1% annual chance could be. You can see in the stream it's deeper. And so, you know, if it's important to know how deep or how deep the flooding could be, that's there. I'll also suggest looking at the water surface elevation grid. You can pan around and this shows the 1% water surface elevation grid. You can click at a point and it'll tell you the water surface elevation. That's also called the base flood elevation, or BFE. That's important to know for your property or nearby, or if you're going to build or do improvements, that's an important number to know. And there's some other ones.
Yes. Can I add one thing? One hazard that we don't map, and that is flooding from a burn scar.
Yes.
Usually that flooding is, you know, there's rain on the upper elevations of the hills and mountains, and even a 1/4 inch of rain on that burn scar. And you've got two very big burn scars. You have the Mission Ridge from way back when, and then you've also got from the 416 fire a couple of years ago. There's a very huge burn scars that are still not revegetated, that can cause not floods, but can cause mud flows as the water comes down and picks up debris and soil that it can't absorb, that can also increase the risk for flooding that we don't map. So it's a,
Mhm.
keep that in mind. If you can look up the hill and you see the burn scar, you need to be thinking about protecting yourself from those mud flows.
Yeah, and I'll add, Diana, actually, this study did have additional funding to do some of those studies up, and they were done more up in the Silverton area because they requested it. So upstream of this. So there is, and they're called non-regulatory data because they're not part of the regulatory map.
Right.
So
Right.
there is some of that data that is available if you're interested. So there are additional scenarios that were mapped, some also snow melt because there was concern with the high snow on the burn scar. So there are
Right.
other things that are not depicted on this website that your communities do have. If you'd like more information on those, reach out to them.
Yeah, and one other thing, when that muck comes down the hill, it goes to its lowest point, and usually you've got a stream along that lowest point where that debris can get in there and could increase the height of that floodwaters that, again, we don't typically include in our analysis.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, and living with wildfires is, every year's there's more and more. So it's something we have to live with and be prepared for. I showed you the website. Here's just in the slide where it is, coloradohazardmapping.com. Excuse me. And in conclusion, these flood plains and flood hazards, they depict risk that is already out there. They're not new risk. Some people get in their notion that, oh, well, we had a flood, so we have to depict new data. Are they based on a specific flood? And no, they're not based off of one specific flood. They're based off of the most up-to-date data and statistics and rainfall and stream flow. But it is mapping risk that is already there. These data will be used for new maps once they become effective. They are preliminary right now, but there is a time frame for communities and constituents and the public to review, to incorporate any changes if there need to be, and to prepare for when they will become effective. Excuse me. So with that, I'll turn the time open it up if everybody's willing to, if there's any specific general questions, we can go to that. And I'll leave this slide here. These are I believe this is the last slide. Yeah. The contacts if you need to find your specific community floodplain administrator. But that's the end of my part. If there are any comments or questions, let's see if there need to be addressed.
So Casey, there is a question in the chat room about the revalidation process and how it works and how property owners will be advised if that is revalidated.
Sure. I can take that, or if anybody else wants to jump into if you have already a letter of map amendment on your property, there's a process towards the end after the appeals come in to make sure that there won't be any more changes. FEMA and their contractors will go through and look and make sure in each individual case that they are revalidated, and they perform what's called a revalidation. You shouldn't have to do anything specific. Just be aware that you had one, and if a lender or insurance agent comes to you and thinks that you might need to pay insurance, but you have been revalidated, those letters get sent to the communities, and they will be able to notify. Was there anything that you wanted to add, Marta, to that?
I think this is Terry Fade. What I'll add is that if the letters of map amendment have been revalidated, the community gets a list of that's called a summary of map actions. When the preliminary maps are issued, they also get one towards after a letter of final determination has been issued, that's been updated to make sure that everything's been included. But on that summary of map actions, it will show which letters of map amendment have been revalidated and which letters of map amendment, if for some reason the water surface has increased in an area, which have been superseded, and which ones that they need additional information for before they can complete the revalidation process. So there is a listing of all those individual letters of map amendment that are provided to the community to show what the status of those individual letters of map amendment are.
And if I may add on top of that, what implications letters of map change, the LOMers and the LOMAs will have on the flood insurance, all it will do is remove it from the floodplain. The risk is still going to be rated on our variables that the new rating methodology is taking into consideration. So the mandatory purchase may be lifted and you may be able to do, you know, different types of development, but that letter of map amendment or letter of map revision or letter of map revision based on fill is not going to give you a benefit in the rate structure on the cost of flood insurance.
I see another question from Rob Harries, I believe, says, how are reservoirs modeled when developing the watershed's hydrologic hydraulic modeling? That's a good question. There are specific criteria, and it's a high standard that FEMA has for reservoirs. You know, there's a wide gamut. Some, you know, you can find some private stock ponds. There you can find some municipal, state-owned, federal-owned, or maintained, or a whole suite in between. Some are not for flood control. Some do incorporate some flood control. Some are meant for flood control. So if there is a reservoir that meets FEMA's criteria and we are able to get the reservoir data, we can in fact incorporate its effects for hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. That's not the case for every, and I'll put in quotes, reservoir, because some don't meet that standard or meet that high standard. They do not have any flood control design. They are meant to pass or not have any ability to hold flood, but there are some that do, and we do incorporate those according to the standards that are given and prescribed by FEMA. Does that answer your question, or are there any others?
Yeah, Josh in the chat room, KC is wanting to know whether or not the Vallecito Dam was included in this study.
Is that one that's upstream? I'll have to check specific on that and I'll get back to that. So if someone could send me either an email or the floodplain administrator to send that so I can send it to Josh. I do believe we looked into it. I'll have to look into the specifics to see how much it was included or not, or to what extent. I mean, that's a very specific one that we'll have to dig into the study. Oh, and someone also asked for Lemon Reservoir, assuming any flood attenuation capability. So I will take a note to look into Lemon and Vallecito.
And this is Terry Fate again. The state engineer's office also has, the dam safety branch also has information regarding a lot of the dams and inspection reports and things around the state. So that's also a resource if you're concerned about a given facility as to the last time it was inspected or not. But as Casey said, for them to be included in the study and for any kind of reduction in peak discharge to be accounted for by them, they need to meet specific standards.
Yeah, are there any other questions, comments?
So this is Sarah, your moderator. If anybody in the audience would like to ask a question verbally, I can let you into the room if you raise your hand in Zoom and let me know that you would like to do that. So there's a little raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen, and I will look for that and let you into the room if you'd like. Or of course, there's the Q&A box that other folks have been using.
Yeah, Mark, so you did mention that the one of the slides, and we're aware of it, that the structures in and out of the effective were shown as 0, and there's actually, that's not true, because the exercise we did was a digital exercise. So if we had digital data, digital footprints, we could compare the effective. For some areas, there was not a digital at the time that we did it, and so those are off. So yes, that is true. It's not a comparison that can be made in some of those areas, and that was one of them, Ignacio. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
All right, I have somebody who's raised their hand, so I will allow you to speak, and you should make sure you unmute yourself. It's S.J. Mater that I've let into the room. All right, I did go ahead and let you in as a panelist, so do make sure to unmute yourself to speak. Oh, I think, no? Okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Gosh, I'm not hearing you. If your audio isn't working, please do type it into the chat or into the Q&A section, and we'll go ahead and answer your question that way. Yeah, I'm still not able to hear that one person, so. Would anybody else like to try to ask a question verbally? Go ahead and raise your hand for me in Zoom. All right, you want to give it another 10 seconds and then we can call the questions over?
Yeah, if no one else raises their hands, I'll express thanks, Sarah, for moderating this, and thank you for all community members and floodplain administrators who helped out. If you have any questions, reach out, and I would like to get that, what was the Q&A, the question about the reservoirs, Rob Harris and one of the others. So
Josh Joswick.
Josh Joshwick. Okay,
Yeah.
I will look to that, and maybe if anyone knows what communities they're associated with, and if their floodplain administrator can work with either us or the state to coordinate so that we have each other's contact information. We'll make sure to get that answered.
Oh, we did just, oh, nope, they raised their hand for a second and then they dropped it. Rick, did you want to speak? Okay, I've given you permission to speak. There you
Wait,
go.
that might have worked.
Yeah, it
fine.
worked. Ta-da!
But I'm actually daisy chaining my phone in for audio, and I have the video on my PC. It took me a while to unmute on the phone for some reason. It wouldn't give me the option. But I have a quick question regarding new data. We're going to be getting some new LiDAR data probably towards the end of the summer. How would we go about incorporating that new data into the flood mapping?
So a lot of this area has already been flown, and there is LiDAR around. The areas that were mapped included, there were multiple LiDAR data sets, included some of the LiDAR that was new for the area at the time. If there have been any changes between when those were flown and when this was flown, Marta, do you remember these were flown, was it 2019?
Between 2018 and 2019, and they were
2018.
finalized in 2020, 2021. So we
Yep.
do have that data. Yep.
We do have that data. If there were major differences due to construction, those type of things should be, noted or picked up, or at least part of a LOMR letter, map revision or something. But for the most part, the areas that were studied by detailed methods did include LiDAR at the time. A new study is commencing for this area that will incorporate new LiDAR, and it'll probably pick up some of the streams and areas that were not studied as part of this, but in other areas and in some of the neighboring counties and communities. And that study will use the most up-to-date LiDAR at the time. So if there are any specific areas that you are aware of or anybody's aware of where the preliminary data that's out now is out of date based off of even newer LiDAR, and it's a priority for you, let us know, let us be aware, because there is additional funding for a further study that will be commencing shortly.
Yeah, we're talking about data that's less than a month old.
Is it, which LiDAR data set is it? Is it a specific for a community or not the one that was
This
flown
would
by?
be the community. This would be Durango and vicinity.
Okay.
Some of the peripheral areas, we don't stretch as far as the Florida, but
Yeah.
it would incorporate most of the Animas River through Durango, several Junction Creek, Lightner Creek, some of those
Right,
areas.
right.
Well, so it is brand new. It also would incorporate areas where we've had some mitigation, flood mitigation in new development areas. So where we have flood ponds, things like that.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
want to incorporate some of that, some of our storm basins and all that might change some of the 2019 data or the
Mhm. Even before, yeah, there were multiple data sets, and some of those stretch back even further. But yeah, if there are specifics and areas that that have changed due to construction mitigation projects, and especially on a scale that will have an effect on some of the rivers and the riverine flooding, not just localized storm drain or on a smaller flooding that doesn't get mapped to the level that FEMA usually maps. Let the state let us know, and we'll make sure to assess, whether they can go into the next round of studies.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because we're not going to get the deliverables probably till very late summer, early fall.
Mhm.
And it would be good for us to review that. It's going to be important for certain areas, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah,
I can't say more until we actually see the deliverables.
exactly. Yeah, to be determined. Yep.
Mhm.
Well, thanks for the question. And that's true in many cases. There's always, new data, new construction, new mitigation, new topography, changes, erosion, scour, remediation. Excuse me. So it's how this process is set up to revisit every once in a while to make sure that the most accurate and up-to-date flood risks are depicted. Are there any other questions? Give it a few seconds. Sarah, all right, I'll turn it back over to you for anything else.
All right, I don't have anything else except for the panelists. The link for tomorrow's meeting is the same as today's. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
So,
you.
bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.